The following is an interview with the Emergency Committee for Rojava. We give the floor to Anya and Emre for the purpose of encouraging our communities in North America to come to the aid of the people who are active participants of what many call the Rojava Revolution. What initially started as a struggle for the Kurdish people to simply exist, today the Rojava Revolution is a living testament to the success of cooperative economics, justice processes based on consensus, grassroots democracy, and so much more. Co-ops Not Cages planned to work on this type of content in late 2022 at the earliest, but Turkey's real threats to invade Rojava again threaten the very existence of the revolution. In the face of this danger, we cannot sit on our hands. We must do something. We wanted to ask so many questions about the revolution to inform others about the incredible transformation taking place in Rojava, including its 200 to 300 cooperatives. But we had to keep this interview short under the circumstances, confining the discussion to just providing context of the revolution, the emergency situation, and what we in North America can do to help. We hope this interview helps to create new sentiments of solidarity and new forms of cooperation across borders. Please take the initiative to act. Watch this video with friends or neighbors and brainstorm the smallest ways you can help the people in Rojava. If you feel uncertain about how to effectively help, get in contact with the Emergency Committee for Rojava, whose information we'll put in the description. The ECR has kind people with lots of advice about how to make an impact that matters. We put the call out to fellow cooperators to join us to defend Rojava and its 200 to 300 cooperatives. Let us know in the comments what you would like to learn about cooperativism, abolitionism, and internationalism as practiced in Rojava today. And let us know how you would like to connect your communities with Rojava. We will do our best to have future content that reflects those needs. If this interview is of value to you, please consider liking, subscribing, and hitting the bell. Thank you. Thanks for being here today. We can do a round of introductions, um, just so the audience knows who everyone is. I'm Chris. I'm with Co-ops Not Cages.
Anya. I'm with the Emergency Committee for Rojava.
Emre here. I'm also with the Emergency Committee for Rojava.
And do you think you can give us just a brief introduction of what the Emergency Committee for Rojava is?
Yeah, so we are sort of a national network based in the United States. It was formed in 2018 in response to Turkey's first invasion of Rojava, invasion and occupation of the region called Afrin in Kurdish. And since then, we have grown and evolved. We started out really as a local group based in New York City, where most of the co-founders of the organization were based at the time. But then with the pandemic, we moved all our meetings, all our events online, and that actually allowed us to grow and become national in scope. We also attract a lot of folks from other countries of the world, especially for our reading groups. They have been quite international recently with the pandemic. And the type of activities that we do are, as I mentioned, educational reading groups, panels, talks with movement representatives, with people who do research or travel to the region. We do outreach to leftist and progressive groups, mostly in the United States, like Co-ops Not Cages. Thank you for having this conversation with us. And we also do some lobbying activities, what we call lobbying. We prepare resources for people in the United States to reach out to their Congress people and ask to take action to defend Rojava, in particular against Turkey's attacks.
Thank you. Yeah, I found out about the revolution around 2014, 2015, and I think within 5 minutes of a friend from Turkey explaining what was going on, I knew it was important support. And we actually did a fundraiser here in Chicago at the Benson House to support the reconstruction of Kobani in 2015, and we have tried to do some type of solidarity since, but it's been very difficult. And it was really exciting to see, like 1 or 2 years ago, the emergency committee for Rojava. I was starting to see news about the ECR coming together, and I was excited to see that because it was very hard for us in Chicago to continue that solidarity. And there, it seemed like there was a group that's going to help to streamline the rekindling of that solidarity throughout the United States and maybe other places, because there were a lot of people who were trying to support Rojava as soon as word started making its way to the United States. But it's hard. It's hard to do these things that we do want to do. So I'm really glad that ECR has taken on this type of work and is able to be a pathway for people who want to continue this work to get re-involved or to get involved for the first time. So there's some terms that maybe we should talk about ahead of time that might help us to begin the conversation. I imagine along the way we might also have to clarify some other terms. But three that come to mind that might be helpful to get us started in the discussion is Rojava, including pronunciation, the AANES, and if y'all think so, maybe we can also talk about Kurdistan, because in our conversations about Rojava, we've always found the need to briefly talk about these three things in the least. But yeah, if y'all have different ideas, other terms to clarify, feel free. We have time for that.
Sure, I'll go ahead and start with the response. Rojava means west. Literally, it means where the sun sets, but it means west in Kurdish, and it refers to the western part of Kurdistan. Let me explain that a little more. Kurdistan is currently and has, for the past century, been occupied by 4 countries in the Middle East: Turkey, Iraq, Iran, and Syria. The overall Kurdistan spans across an area as big as, actually a little bigger than Great Britain, and has a total population of 35 to 40 millions. The biggest part of Kurdistan occupied by a nation state is the Turkish occupied part to the north, with almost half the population and more than half the size. And the smallest part of the 4 occupied parts is the Syrian occupied part, which we call Rojava, again referring to Western Kurdistan. Kurdistan is not recognized by any other state in the world, and Kurdish people have been, suffering from the consequences of this occupation for more than a century. AANES, the Autonomous Administration of North and East Syria, is the official name for what we usually refer to as Rojava. Among Kurdish scholars, activists, or Kurdish people in general, or peoples of the region, Rojava is also fairly known, but the official name for the autonomous administration there is the Autonomous Administration of North and East Syria, the acronym of which is AANES. And even this differences in name and emphasis sheds a light on the pluralism and multi-ethnicism in the region. Western Kurdistan, predominantly Kurdish population. However, not only Kurds, but Arabs, Caucasians, Turkmens, different ethnic groups are actively participant in political, social, and economic life. And the decision on what the official name would be was determined collectively with considerations to not make it just about Kurdishness and have a more, neutral name, which is the Autonomous Administration of North and East Syria.
Thank you. And along the way, we might have to clarify some other terms, but I think this is a good start. And part of one thing that I've understood about why some of the terms get complicated is because of the revolution's success. Yeah, in building a like you said, a pluralistic society. The struggle started with uh, the emancipation of one part of the community in the Middle East, and now it's affected so many people. And with success comes new challenges, and I think that's reflected in some of the terms that sometimes we grapple with when we talk about Rojava. So yeah, let's talk about the revolution.
Uh, I'll begin with some political and historical context, and Anya, please feel free to jump in at any point. The revolution officially started almost a decade ago, but I think we can rightfully date it back even further to the establishment of the Kurdish movement in the region. So let me begin with the past 10 years, and I will delve a little deeper into the history. Uh, when the Arab Spring began a little over a decade in the MENA region, Middle East and North Africa, Syria was one of the countries that got impacted with the increasing popular demands for emancipation and protests against corruption and crippling living standards in the region. And in 2012, Syrian people started taking to the streets and protesting Bashar al-Assad's policies in all different levels. The Syrian government responded to a really brutal crackdown of the people, unarmed people in the streets, and some Middle Eastern and Western countries capitalized on this unrest and started funding armed factions from these disgruntled masses. Primarily, the US, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey began funding groups, and several armed factions began to appear, and clashes with Syrian regime forces and these armed factions, which can be dated back to late 2011, 20, and early 2012, grew into a civil war, which since then has resulted in the relocation of more than 9 million Syrians, majority of which fled to Europe. And currently, Turkey also has a significant Syrian population that were displaced by the conflict. Cities such as Aleppo were mostly destroyed with their infrastructures gone, and thousands and thousands of people have been killed and injured by the clashes. Over the past 10 years, there hasn't been a clear military winner of the civil war, and the Rojava Revolution was made official during this unrest. When the clashes escalated, primarily Kurds in Rojava, started organizing councils at different levels, and started organizing also military councils at the different levels, and quickly filled in the of power that was left when Assad strategically withdrew his forces from North Syria to focus on the fight against Turkey and Saudi-backed groups in different parts of the country, primarily Aleppo and Latakia. Rojavan forces and Assad forces didn't really exchange bullets or fight each other at this time, and Rojava filled in the autonomous administration offices, filled in the vacuum that was created during the civil war. However, the experiences and the ideology that has fed this revolution can be dated all the way back to the 70s and early 80s. Ideologically, Rojava is organized around principles of democratic confederalism, which was put forth by PKK, Kurdistan Workers' Party leader Abdullah Öcalan in the early 2000s. Democratic confederalism is a direct democratic, grassroots, gender egalitarian, environmentalist, and internationalist sort of model proposal of self-governance, where communities ranging from the street assembly to the city, district, and regional assemblies not only directly participate in political, economic, and social life, but govern their lives and region by themselves directly. So the ideological foundations of the revolution can be dated back to 4 or 5 decades ago with the establishment and transformation of the Kurdish movement that's active all over all over Kurdistan.
Anya, was there anything that you wanted to add?
Yeah, perhaps just to say that this ideology, this kind of body of thought that was developed, that came out of the PKK, that Emre mentioned, democratic confederalism, that it has been implemented, has been developed in Rojava with a good degree of success, I would say. Of course, different aspects have been more difficult to develop, and there are different challenges in different spheres. But I think it's very important to emphasize that what's unique and what's appealing to me personally about what people in Rojava are doing is that they're trying to revolutionize the life across these different spheres, right? Gender relations. It's a very strong and arguably the most successful, right, aspect of the revolution. Women's empowerment, social ecology, right? There is this awareness and efforts to raise consciousness about the need to change our relationship to nature. There is an aspect of democratizing economy through building cooperatives, and that's where bridges can be built with groups like Crops Not Cages. There is also an attempt to change how we do justice, right? How we solve conflicts among each other. So there is a bridge with the ideas and practices of abolition in the United States. Democratization of politics through popular assemblies that are located, that are built on a village level, on a neighborhood level. As Emre mentioned, the idea is that people can directly decide on the matters that affect their life by coming together and talking about those matters. What else? Pluralism, right? And Emre mentioned that they aspire to overcome the nation-state model, right? They aspire to overcome the favoring of certain ethnic or religious groups within the state, right? So it's a non-state type of democracy where different ethnic groups have, can have autonomy in terms of the issues that affect them, right? But they do not aspire to build their own state and exclude other religious and ethnic groups, right? So there's a completely different paradigm at work here. Yeah, so a lot of things have been changed there.
Thank you. If you have nothing else to add, Emre, we should start talking about what's going on right now, the urgency of the matter, and yeah, and then we'll move on to like what we can do.
Sure, let's talk about the recent history and what has been happening. To begin with a little more political and diplomatic context, like I said, Rojava was able to come to life with the vacuum of power that the Syrian civil war caused and the sort of underground organization of the peoples, which with the vacuum became above ground. And this project has been threatened by multiple actors in the region. The Syrian state, which is a Ba'athist Arab nationalist state, has been hostile to all non-Arab populations that live within Syria since its establishment in the 1950s. Current President Bashar al-Assad's father, Hafez al-Assad, who was elected, came to power after a coup, I think, in 59 or 1960, created this Arab Belt project and took the citizenship of hundreds of thousands of Kurds and put all these oppressive policies to assimilate the Kurds and make them dependent on the state for their literal sustenance, and has been close to any discussions, debates of autonomy, let alone self-administration by, of different peoples, and has been desiring to see the end of the Rojava Revolution and Rojava project, and would like to incorporate Rojava into its control as soon as possible. So another hostile actor in the region is Turkey. Turkey, which has been waging a war with the PKK since early 1980s, 1984 to be more precise, has seen the autonomous administration in Rojava sort of as an extension of the PKK and has been dubbing it terrorist and attacking it at different points over the past 10 years. This is actually a little contradictory because when the autonomous administration was first declared, Turkish President Erdogan hosted Saleh Muslim, who was the former autonomous administrative co-president of the region of Rojava, and offered sort of like a proxy deal, said we will work with you, Turkey will work with you if you enter the Syrian National Army and rise up against Assad and be my proxy force. And the autonomous administration refused this and decided not to take sides in the Syrian civil war, as in not directly fight with Assad against the opposition or vice versa. And after Rojava's insistence on this third path policy, Turkey increased its hostilities along with the end of the peace negotiations between the PKK and Turkey during the mid-2010s. Turkey started to adopt a more hostile approach. Since 2015-2016, Turkey has carried out two major crossover operations, and each time it occupied 5 to 10% of Rojava's area, first in Afrin and later in Grespi and Anya. And Turkey, especially over the past 5-6 years, Turkey has been viewing Rojava as sort of a threat to its own, because Turkey occupies a significant part of Kurdistan and is worried that experience of self-determination and autonomy in Syria-occupied Kurdistan in Rojava may aspire or may lead to similar developments in the areas that it itself occupies in southeast Turkey / North Kurdistan. So Rojava, politically and diplomatically, has these two major threats and has been pursuing a sort of third path policy that I mentioned, both regarding the Syrian civil war, as in against Syrian national opposition, Syrian national army, and Assad's regime forces. And Turkey has adopted autonomous administration of North and East Syria. Rojava has adopted a similar third path policy diplomatically and internationally. What do we mean by this? Although it's heavily assisted by the US, especially militarily, diplomatically and politically, it doesn't align itself with neither the US nor Russia, and is open to collaboration with both camps that are active in the Syrian civil war. As we know, hegemonic forces of Russia and US are on the ground. Also, Iranian forces, Turkish forces are on the ground. So there are many regional and global actors at play, and the autonomous administration has been able to maintain its autonomous rule and its revolutionary project through maneuvering this really windy course path of the third way, taking advantage of the disagreements between these regional and global players and not siding with one completely, and focusing on building its infrastructure has been the political and diplomatic response. Going back to the Turkish invasions, they are the biggest threat at the moment. Syrian regime forces, although still hostile, has not been directly attacking, occupying. To the contrary, when Turkey started invading Afrin in 2018 and Serikani and Grespi in 2019, it sort of pushed Syrian state and the autonomous administration even a little closer, because a Turkish invasion not only threatens Rojava and the autonomous administration there, but Syria as well. Syria is very familiar of the Ottoman legacy and Turkish control over Syria for 400 centuries until the First World War. So over the past 2-3 years, with more and more Turkish invasions, Assad, Syrian regime and Rojava collaborate just a little more, but this collaboration has not yielded any significant results, because Assad still maintains its ethnic, authoritarian approach, an assimilative approach to Rojava, and all these alliances that I've been trying to describe are, very temporary, can be shifted in any day. So Rojava is continuing to increase its autonomies and capabilities, while not losing the grounds that have been, the strides that have been made over the past 10 years.
So I brought up the map of areas of control. Do you think it would be worth it to spend some time just talking about what this map means and how it relates to what you just described to us?
Sure. So the areas in blue are Syrian state-controlled Assad's regime. They fall under Assad regime control. Within those areas, as you see, there's a sort of light blue, light green part in the south, which hosts an American base, Al-Tanf, and American-supported Syrian opposition factions.
Sorry, where is that on the map? Is it where? Can you see my cursor? I doubt it, right?
I cannot see your cursor, but it's right to the north of where it says Jordan. You see,
Okay.
It's like southern Syria, to the north of Jordan, next to the infographic. That area hosts the U.S. base, and the other areas near or within Assad control but contested are the sort of grayish area that falls to the east of the country, below where it says Deir al-Zor. That grayish area still includes ISIS cells. ISIS operates there clandestinely, and sometimes organizes raids and attacks on Syrian regime forces. The dark green area to the top left, where it says Idlib, is under the control of Al-Qaeda in Syria, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham serves as a proxy of Turkey in the region and grew out of many factions that were supported and financed by the US, by Turkey, and by Saudi Arabia, and had at one point occupied Aleppo and had threatened to invade all of western Syria. The areas to the north in red are under Turkish occupation, beginning from Afrin and moving on to Tel Abyad, Grespi in Kurdish, and to Serekaniye. Those are the pockets that Turkey occupied in 2018 and 2019. And the areas to the north and west in yellow are where the Autonomous Administration of Northern Syria exists. As you see, there are patches of blue in some of those areas, like where it says Manbij, Kobani, Ainisa, Raqqa, and Tiltamer and Qamushlo. Those patches of blue are areas where Syrian army units exist. They're not governed by the Syrian regime. However, certain Syrian army columns exist because they were invited by the Autonomous Administration in 2019, right after the Turkish occupation of Afrin. This refers back to this sort of thawing of relations between Syrian regime and Rojava. However, the Autonomous Administration, the Syrian state only has limited military presence and no administrative and otherwise presence. So yeah, that's pretty much all and to the bottom left, there's a darker blue area closer to Israel, which is the Golan Heights under Israeli control since the 1967 war.
All right. Should we take a look at the next map, or how should we go forward?
Sounds good.
All right. Well, here is the other map that we wanted to share.
It's great that we brought up this map because I had forgot to mention the sort of security zone that Erdogan proposed. As I said, in 2018, Turkish forces led by Erdogan invaded Afrin, and the following year, Turkish army and its proxies invaded Tel Abyad and Serekaniye. So these are the areas in red that you can see in this map. However, they were part of this Erdogan's broader plan for occupying entire northern Syria. He calls it the security zone that spans 13 kilometers inwards from the existing Turkish-Syrian border. And this so-called security zone would begin near Yarubiye to the north, to the top right corner of this map, where we see a purple line beginning in Yarubiye and going through Tel Hamas, Tel Tamer, Ainisa, Sarin, Manbij, and spanning all the way until Afrin. Now, first of all, this area makes up close to 65-70% of entire Rojava population. So the population in Rojava is primarily concentrated along this line, particularly the ethnic Kurdish population. And through this security zone, Erdogan wants to sort of kill two birds with one stone, so to speak. First, by displacing the Kurds there and ending any possible aspiration for Kurdish autonomy and or self-rule in the region. And second, to use this security zone as its own occupied area where it would dump all the Syrian refugees that are scattered across Turkey and, have a sort of proxy state of its own with Arab majority population. This security zone has been hard to implement, and Erdogan has been held back because Syrian skies are not controlled by the Turkish air forces. They're controlled by American and Russian air forces. Russian Air Force holds aerospace control of Syria in areas that fall to the west of the Euphrates River. As we see in this map, this river that separates the areas in gray and yellow, that's the Euphrates running through Syria, and any part that falls to the west is under Russian airspace control, and any area that's to the east of the river is under American airspace control. And the Turkish state was able to carry out the first invasion, the 2018 Afrin invasion, because Putin gave the green light back then in exchange for some political and diplomatic tit-for-tat favors. Russia allowed Turkish planes in the region, which then accelerated the Turkish occupation of the area. Mind you, the autonomous administration does not have any aerospace and very limited military capabilities compared to the second largest army in NATO, the Turkish armed forces. In 2019, the story changed a little bit because the areas of Tel Abyad and Serekania were under American airspace control. Through some negotiations, most of them informal over the phone with Donald Trump, the president back then, Erdogan managed to convince Trump to withdraw its forces in exchange for some political favors. And when that happened, similar fate. Rojavan forces couldn't resist Turkish army and its proxies with their airplanes and other means, and Turkey managed to occupy that. So Turkey has to sort of get the blessing of the global forces before furthering its occupations to reach the security zone. Also, the acceptance, the existence, the possibility of the security zone very much rests on the blessing of either the USA or Russia, or even possibly both. So yeah, this area is helpful in outlining the threat of Turkish invasion and the political and diplomatic context in which those happen.
The link between Turkey and ISIS. I think it's been briefly mentioned so far. Is now a good time to talk about that?
Sure. Turkey has links with not only ISIS, but also other Islamist groups in the Middle East and in Syria, such as al-Qaeda and such as other Syrian National Army factions and brigades. To contextualize this, the Turkish state has pursued a more neo-Ottoman regional policy since Erdogan came to power in Turkey in 2011, early 2012. Before that, since the foundation of the republic in 1923, Turkey had sort of like been facing to the West and dealing diplomatically with Western countries, trying to enter NATO, which it later succeeded, trying to enter the European Union, and was engaging with the West. And with Erdogan's party, AKP, coming into power, the diplomatic way of relating to the neighbors also changed. Neo-Ottomanism, both at home in Turkey and in its diplomatic relations internationally, was adopted as the ideology, meaning sort of returning to good old Ottoman glory days. Under this approach, Turkey has been very active in Middle Eastern and North African politics. Over the past 10 years, this new Ottomanist policy kicked off a little, 12, 13 years ago. A few years after coming into power, Erdogan and his ministers started adopting this policy, spanning from Morocco to Algeria to Libya to ranging to Qatar and Nagorno-Karabakh, Syria. Turkey has been involving in the national politics of these regions and supporting different oppositional groups which rise up and clash against the governments there, such as in Syria and Libya. And Turkey has been using this with a religious rhetoric, just like Erdogan has been gaining support both at home and internationally by using an Islamist rhetoric. Turkey has been using a religious Islamist rhetoric in its recruitment of mercenaries and its involvement in the affairs of other countries in the region to, at the end of the day, to increase its own power and influence over the region. So in this context, in the Syrian civil war, Turkey has heavily used any Islamist faction that it can find and control. There are reports of Turkish communication and collaboration with al-Qaeda in Syria, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Putin himself had made comments in late 2015 when Turkish airplanes shot down a Russian airplane in Syrian airspace. Putin was threatening to make public documents of Erdogan's ministers and Erdogan's family members making oil trade and other trade with ISIS. Turkish journalists have exposed Turkish state trucks that were sent to ISIS and Al-Qaeda controlled parts of Syria, mounted with guns and ammunitions and all sorts of death machines. So Turkey, through this pursuit of Islamist neo-Ottomanist expansion in the region, has been causing up to jihadists all across the world.
We don't have to talk about this. We can edit this section out. But is it ever useful to talk about the connection of U.S. aid to Turkey and then what's going on with Turkey in its relationship to ISIS? You don't have to talk about it.
Sure. The U.S. aid to Turkey, I think it's very similar in the sense that the U.S. aid to, let's say, Saudi Arabia and Israel in the region. All of these countries are countries of instability and war in the region. And the U.S., although pretends to have a human rights-based and democracy-based approach to diplomatic relations and international politics, far from that, it's more realist calculation of benefits and potential losses, and this realpolitik calculation of how to maximize its power in the region. So just like the US has been funding Saudi Arabia's bombing and starvation of Yemen over the past decade, just like its annual support of $3 to $4 billion to Israel every year for its ability to continue its occupation and brutalization of native Palestinians. It's been following a similar policy with Turkey, funding Turkey's war on Kurdish people since the 1980s, listing the PKK as a terrorist organization, just like it used to list Nelson Mandela's liberation movement as a terrorist for decades, and supporting Turkish cross-border operations into Iraq and Syria. The US has been instrumental in Turkey's ability to pursue a new Ottomanist policy and keep occupying Kurdistan. What separates Turkey from Israel and Saudi Arabia is it's not only a US ally, but it's also a NATO power, which makes it, even closer, some can argue. And this NATO membership is inevitably coming back to bite the US and Western countries, as we are seeing in the case of Finland and Sweden's attempt to join NATO. Turkey is, if I'm not mistaken, the only Muslim majority member of NATO and the only Middle Eastern member of NATO, is using its veto right to prevent Sweden and Finland from joining NATO in exchange for some political gains, like close down Kurdish people's political offices and media outlets in Sweden and Finland, and promise not to recognize the autonomous administration in North and East Syria, and sell us more F-35 fighter jets instead of giving us the old F-16. So with the special status Turkey enjoys through NATO membership, Turkey is also holding the US and West hostage in many aspects of Middle Eastern politics and world affairs.
And there was recently an attack on Rojava, and I remember when it happened, there was a picture that came in of one of the rocket launchers. I believe it was a rocket launcher that was used by ISIS, and was it corroborated? The rocket launcher showed that it was a NATO rocket launcher, and this is, and we can talk about this too. That bombing of the school. We can get into that if you want.
Sure. Anya, would you like to start us first with this and I'll join you?
I'm not sure which specific attacks you're referring to, Chris, but we should, say that Turkey and its jihadi proxies have been attacking the autonomous administration basically nonstop since the last invasion in 2019. So both shelling, bombings from the territory that is occupied by Turkey and its proxies, the territory that Emre just showed on the map, as well as drone attacks coming out from Turkey directly that have been targeting political leaders, activists, movement people, assassinating them, and the shellings that take place basically on everyday basis. Those have been targeting civilians and civilian infrastructure, like schools that you mentioned. So yes, that's an everyday reality that people in Rojava are experiencing.
Anya,
Go ahead.
outlining attacks really effectively. I'd just like to add a couple points, such as Turkey's weaponization of water. Aluk station in Anya, which has been under Turkish control for the past 3 years, provides more than 50% of the water to the region. It's located on the Euphrates. Soon after it leaves Turkish occupied territory and crosses the border, there's an Aluk water storage distribution station that provides water for all the neighboring cities, like Hasaka and even Raqqa and Qamishli partially. So Turkey has been cutting access from this water station to areas under the control of the autonomous administration of Northeast Syria. So not only targeting military or political figures, Turkey also weaponizes water and targets health officials, for example, health personnel during its operations, health trucks, health minibuses. All of these amount to crimes of war, and uses chemical weapons. There have been local reports of chemical weapon usage during the invasion of Anya, and I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, either Rojava Information Center or some office of the autonomous administration that had produced reports and even sent to international courts. But all of these pleas were ignored because of, the world's blindness to the issue and continued support to Turkey.
The incident I was referring to took place earlier this year, I believe. I was made aware of it because I was helping through telecommunication to teach students in Rojava English. And there was a moment where the students were afraid to go back to school because there was a prison break of ISIS trying to extract other ISIS members. And then they, if I remember correctly, they took hostages in one of the schools, and then the school was bombed without permission. And correct me if I'm wrong, but by the United States, and the faculty was killed. And at least that's how we understood it at the time. And the students were terrified. They didn't want to go back to school because there was rumors that ISIS was potentially at the school to escalate the war and at university in a public education setting. Yeah, that's what came to mind earlier. And it's sad that by default, United States citizens and residents, our money, our resources, our labor is going to support this annexation, occupation, ethnic cleansing, genocide across seas. And it's just one other realm in which this is taking place. But
I do remember the incident now. Thank you, Chris, for the reminder. This happened, like you said, like maybe 6-7 months ago. There was a big ISIS prison break in al-Hol camp, located close to Haseke in eastern Syria. Al-Hol is the biggest camp of ISIS prisoners and their family members. And even though ISIS doesn't hold any territorial control anymore, it's still clandestinely organized, and inside the prison, it's organized too. And I think close to more than 100. I don't remember the exact number, but a few hundred ISIS prisoners collaborated and made a prison break. I think around 400 managed to escape temporarily, and killed dozens of Rojava security officials during their escape. And the U.S. forces and autonomous administration forces rapidly responded to capture the few hundred ISIS prisoners that had spread into nearby towns and villages, the ones that are close to al-Hol camp. In this attempt to capture these 300-400 ISIS prisoners, autonomous administration and U.S. forces began this military operation. And in its implementation, as you pointed out, not only ISIS members were harmed, but also civilians were harmed, including some students and faculty that were held hostage by ISIS prisoners that had escaped. Like you said, the U.S. role in the region can be much more constructive and much more positive if it can have a stronger stance against the threats of Turkish invasion, against the threats of Syrian invasion, and a deeper support, both politically, diplomatically, and economically and socially, a deeper support for the autonomous administration of North and East Syria.
And just to add that prison outbreak attempt is another good example of the ties between Turkey and ISIS, because there is evidence collected by the autonomous administration by journalists on the ground that Turkey was supporting those ISIS cells, those ISIS prisoners who were organizing the outbreak. And then when the outbreak happened, Turkey actually targeted a vehicle of the SDF, of the Syrian Democratic Forces, which is the military arm of the autonomous administration, that was bringing reinforcement, that was bringing support to the autonomous administration's forces battling against the prisoners, the ISIS prisoners who were trying to break out. So, the Turkish support was quite clear at that point. And you're right, the United States policy is extremely contradictory, and this is a very good example. Right, while the United States was taking action against this prison outbreak and supporting, as part of its support for the autonomous administration, which is the key actor in the U.S.-led global coalition against ISIS. Right, at the same time, the NATO member, the U.S. ally, the country that receives on a regular basis the United States weaponry and financial aid and all the kinds of military equipment, it was taking action to support ISIS and to enable them to successfully break out. So it's very, very glaring contradiction there, where the funding goes, where our taxpayer money goes. Right?
I remember when ISIS was in large part destroyed. There was news coming from Rojava saying that ISIS will reemerge if we don't deal with the entire structure and system that enables ISIS to operate, and that includes Turkey. And I don't know if they said this, but I'm saying this, that includes American passivity or inactivity on this, because America, United States government makes this stuff possible, and only United States residents can change that. So what can people do to protect Rojava, to protect its co-ops, to protect its people, and everything else that's positive that's going on in Rojava? We're not able to get into a lot of what's going on over there today. Hopefully in the future, a discussion, we can talk about all the amazing things going on over there, including the children's assemblies. But what can people do?
Right. So as Emre mentioned, the possibility of another Turkish invasion is really the greatest threat to Rojava and to all of its achievements at that point. And we at ECR, we are very alarmed by the renewed threats by the Turkish government to once again invade Rojava, to complete the project, this project of the security zone that was not completed, that Erdogan was prevented from completing in 2019. And what's alarming is that Turkey is trying to take advantage of Russia's invasion of Ukraine right now, and Turkey's own role in this conflict. As Emre mentioned, Turkey right now is utilizing its NATO membership, its veto power as a NATO member, to stall the entry of Sweden and Finland into NATO in exchange for such concessions as lifting of arms embargo to Turkey, right? So Turkey is trying to get more jet flights that it has used in its invasions and its attacks against Kurds. Turkey is trying to play off Russia and the United States, right? In this Ukrainian crisis, Turkey has not supported either side fully, right? And is trying to support both camps and get favors and concessions from both camps at the same time. So we do not know whether Turkey may be able to get another green light either from Russia or the United States, in exchange for certain favors or concessions vis-a-vis the situation in Ukraine, right? So we do not know. The likelihood of another invasion, we believe, is much higher at this point, given this international conjuncture as well as domestic conjuncture. One thing that we haven't mentioned is that the next year is Turkey's presidential and parliamentary elections, and Erdogan has been consistently using the so-called Kurdish question to rally support for himself and for his own party. So he may use another invasion of north and east Syria in order to secure more support for himself, given that there is nothing else that he can give to his supporters, right? The country is in a dire economic crisis. So what we are asking our supporters and people who want to support Rojava to do is, specifically those who are based in the United States, is to reach out to the government, to the US government, and ask the United States government to take action, and specifically to publicly condemn Turkey's threats to invade northeast Syria once again, to threaten some clear consequences if such an invasion happens, including more sanctions, right, against the Turkish government, and to use any diplomatic channels that it is using right now, that the United States is using vis-a-vis Russia, right, to oppose and to make it more difficult for Russia to continue its invasion of Ukraine. So we are basically asking the United States to take similar action towards Turkey to prevent another invasion, and make it more difficult for Turkey to take on, to launch such an invasion. But as I mentioned in the beginning, we do not just work with the Congress. There are other actions that people could do. For example, what you are doing right now is really great, right? We're having this conversation that, as I understand, you will share with the members of your group, that can be possibly shared on social media, just to raise awareness, about this issue, about this looming threat, about the ongoing attacks against Rojava, just to expand the support among the U.S. public for Rojava. And once people are aware, once people are learn about the amazing things that are happening in Rojava, we hope that we can also get more action going in terms of how to defend Rojava, whether it's in terms of demonstrations on the streets or calling our Congress people.
Emre, was there anything you wanted to add?
Sure. To piggyback on Anya's comments, I know, in some circles, appealing to the state, making an ask to representatives is heavily problematized and criticized. However, at this point of contacting representatives mainly is born out of this dire need to try and influence the major power holders in the region, because whether we like it or not, the US is on the ground in Syria, Russia is on the ground in Syria, and these are the most powerful actors on the ground. So both Turkey and the autonomous administration and other actors are not fully independent in their actions in the region. And what will determine the future of the Syrian civil war, what will determine some sort of transition to peace and an end to the war, will primarily come from the two strongest sides, US and Russia, and influencing the decision-making mechanisms of both of these actors, not just the US, but also and influencing in a way that is going to favor the autonomous administration's survival, is like an immediate need born out of a dire situation, uh, which is the reason why all the autonomous administration has employed this third path, diplomatically neutral approach to try and work with all the actors in the region. So I hope comrades will remember this dire urgency when they're hesitant about uh, calling or writing to a representative.
By the way, just to finish off, when we ask people to call and email their representatives, we do have a toolkit, right, that we prepare for different emergencies, that we update for renewed emergencies, so people can go to our social media, our Twitter account, our Facebook account, our website to access this toolkit, and it includes the script, a suggested script that people can use when they make such calls. It includes numbers and email addresses that people can send this script to or call. So we sort of have everything prepared. And in terms of other actions, if anyone wants to set up a similar conversation, either internal or public within their organization, again, folks can reach out to ECR, and we would be happy to send some of our members to participate in such a conversation for educational purposes, or if folks want to distribute different outreach materials about the revolution or about the current threat to the revolution, again, we can supply those and will help prepare those.
And one last addition to my response to the question. I invite people to think of showing solidarity in any way they can, not necessarily limited to these contacting state representatives, but for example, our audience, co-ops, not cages, are involved in collective economic practices and organizations, and the collective economy, cooperatives, communes in Rojava is a strong vein. So there is great potential of solidarity and collaboration in this collective economy, organizing cooperatives, communes type of way. If you are not a member of a co-op in the US, but let's say of a feminist organization, similarly, Kurdish women's movement is organized autonomously and is seeking to increase international solidarity. If you are part of a film commune, the film communes in Rojava are increasingly reaching out, trying to make collaborative projects to redefine, film in the 21st century in a different emancipatory way. So no matter what you spend great amounts of time on or what moves you, there is sort of potential for collaboration with folks in Rojava, and as ECR we'd be happy to facilitate that.
Yeah, I think one term for that is organize where you stand. Um, whatever networks, connections you have, there's some relevance that you can find to make bridges, and I think that's what we need the most is bridges, because a lot of work is put in to separate us, um, so that we don't know the truth and that so we don't act. Um, one of the things that I like about ECR is a lot of the public space that y'all hold for people to learn and be connected. And I just wanted to mention that, and I'll definitely try to put some links in for people to connect. Um, I know that there are people like me who it's very hard to kind of act without collaborating with the people who are asking me to act. Um, so, and that's one great thing I like about ECR, the reading discussions that y'all have, and then you have planning meetings where people are invited to come in, and so I wanted to mention that in case anybody needs that type of space in order to go forward and to try something out with your community or as an individual. So thank you so much for taking time out to talk about this. I hope that we're able to talk about more because there's so much that people in this sphere and in this country, sorry, hemisphere. There's so much that people in this hemisphere have to learn about what's going on in Rojava. It's very inspiring. I had a friend who came back from there, and he saw how the children are growing up. You know, in the United States, we have a lot of cynicism about how like each new generation is just so abused and torn apart by the system that like things are getting worse, and it's kind of like an abysmal future for the people who are coming after us. But I had a friend who saw the children growing up in the revolution and seeing like how they're treating each other, and how like grassroots democracy, it's not hard, it's easy, because when you grow up in it, when you're actually acculturated to cooperate with others, it's just so easy. And that's a lot of the work that we're doing in the cooperative economy, is unlearning all the ways in which we dominate and don't know how to work together. And it's amazing to hear news of Rojava about how it's easy. It's easy if you know when you grow up in that environment. Um, and I hope that this video has the effect of making it even easier and preserving that. We have so much to learn from that, and we have so much solidarity to practice. But do y'all have any final words before we sign off for today?
I just wanted to thank you once again for all of the efforts that you have undertaken so far to help us with our work and to help the people in Rojava, with the building their revolution. I hope we'll have more conversations with the co-ops, not cages, and I hope this conversation will inspire more leftist groups in the United States to have similar conversations and build bridges, as you said, with Rojava.
Definitely.
And
Go ahead, Emre.
similarly, I want to end with saying that the success of our local struggles does not solely depend on our local organization, but also the degree with which we can make these causes international and make our resistance more international, collaborative on the global sense, because regressive forces are correlating increasingly all over the world, and I invite all CNC members and other members who are tuning in right now to keep this in the back of their minds when they're confronted with moments of international solidarity in the future.
Definitely. Well, thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.